Hi and welcome. This is Angela, and today I'm sharing something very close to my heart. It's about the inspiration of romance through the devotion to life. And as you can hear, my voice is struggling. I've been dealing with a cold. So I'll make this one short. And the video is also a little introduction to the Sufi movement and the Bhakti movements that started, around the year 1000 to 1500. There was a whole series of Sufi movements and the Bhakti movement. I'm going to touch on them because I really want to share how, when we look at love from a place of passion, how some of this passion has come through the romantic poets, through Shakespeare, who was inspired by the Eastern poetry that came through the Sufi poets and the Bhakti movement that started in India through Kabir, largely. Kabir was a saint and a Sufi who was non-denominational. He had no religion. And I wanted to share a beautiful phrase of his poetry called My Body is Flooded. And I thought the title, it's in English from the original Hindi, but My Body is Flooded connotes a lot of that passion that we have through erotic love. Yet these Sufis and these mystical experiences were already experiencing how the body is full of life, how the breath is full of life. And it's what I discovered when I stumbled by accident in 1997 into my first Sufi movement class in Byron Bay. So I've given in the description a little video that you can look at that looks at the Sufi tradition. It started from Baghdad, and it was a movement and a music and a poetry-based movement, also philosophical movement that came from Islam. And then at some point they moved to India because of some of the wars that were going on. And the Sufi movement then often integrated with a lot of the mystical traditions of India that are still alive today and have evolved, but they're still alive. And one of the famous saints from India is Kabir. And Kabir was a saint who was loved and beloved, and still is, of people from all religious backgrounds in India, Sikh, Muslim and Hindu. And they all saw him as Sikh or Muslim or Hindu, but actually he was non-denominational, and he was from the 1300s and 1400s. We don't know the exact time. And he used to teach people that you don't need religion, that God is within you. And so the Sufi teachings were very similar, not that you don't need religion, but the actual connection to God was done through these experiential happenings. They were quite like the 60s movements of happenings where people had these parties. The Sufis would dance into the night. My teacher, Adnan Sarhan, who's no longer here physically, we would do Sufi dance really late into the morning, and then we would be talking till 6 o'clock in the morning because we were so high from the experience of literally dancing and breathing and chanting and drumming. So it was quite a sort of alternative lifestyle movement that started in the Middle Ages. And of course, back then it wasn't considered alternative. It was considered a practice, and it was considered a path. So a lot of these Sufis all taught different teachings. There was no right, there was no wrong. And when it came to India, when it mixed with the merry multiple cultural paths of India and the multiplicity of culture there and the multiplicity of spiritual practices in India, it created and fostered enlightenment practices. And Kabir was one of those beautiful teachers that was able to share with people that God actually is an experience. It's an experience from within, and through his poetry that's still with us today and still inspiring musicians today. Jajik Singh, he's no longer alive, but Jajik Singh is one of my favorite musicians, and I've fallen in love with one of his songs, which is based on the poetry of Kabir. So I wanted to read this poetry of Kabir and then look at how devotion and the Bhakti movement and finding love through devotion is a path not just to, we've now taken it into romance. So in our modern culture, we took some of the devotional poetry of the Sufis and of the Bhakti movement, and that came into Middle Eastern poetry that then inspired the writers such as Shakespeare and the other romantic poetry of the Renaissance. And then that's been translated into the romantic work of our modern day writers, if we look at modern from the 1800s onwards, that removed romance from this devotion to life. So I wanted to read the poetry that is inspired by Kabir, his piece called My Body is Flooded. And it starts with, my body is flooded with the flame of love. My soul lives in a furnace of bliss. Love's fragrance fills my mouth and fans through all things with each outbreath. And Kabir has several poems in this caliber. He also looks at sort of more existential crisis type poems. And he really shares how this feeling of life that flows through us is in every single piece of existence. So typically the Sufi movement, which I'm sharing in a class that I'm starting in July in Marrickville at Amira's Palace, the Sufi movement is about that in-breath and the out-breath and synchronizing your movements with the in-breath and the out-breath, because it's just that simple synchronization of movement with the in-breath and the out-breath that can connect you instantly to the power of this life that we experience. And it's so easy in our modern culture to be consumed by other things. And the Sufis, thousands of years ago now, reduced the magnificence of life to some of these simple, repetitive movements and gestures such as in-breath and out-breath, in-breath and out-breath. And if you listen to their music, there's a repetitive rhythmic rhythm in a lot of the Sufi music that comes from the Far East to India to the Middle East. And it started the other direction, though the ideas started, but then the music now through Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, who's a well-known Sufi musician, Jajik Singh, who's a beautiful Urdu-based musician. They have given this beautiful rhythmic sound that's created devotional music that can literally start to transport you into this feeling of that rhythm of our in-breath and our out-breath. And I wanted to share how that connects to our modern day understanding of romance. So last time I looked at teenage love and the passion of teenage love. And these devotional writings capture that passion that comes from our very breath, our very life force, our very experiencing of the life within us. And in the ancient times and the more recent medieval times and then the Renaissance times, it was translated into this romantic poetry, which was always connected to some sort of devotion to something larger than yourself, life, God, the universe, whatever you call it. It's something that encapsulates you, that surrounds you. For myself, in the dance, that thing that surrounded me was the space. So in dance, whenever I used to dance in that space, I would start to feel an element of love in that space. However, these ancient cultures that started the Romantic poetry then have now become, through the writers that were very successful, such as Shakespeare, and the Romantic writers of the 1800s, to have taken that romantic quality and brought it to our love relationships as something that we're looking for constantly, that often is not available to us, something like unrequited love, where we're constantly longing and yearning and we can't seem to find it. Whereas if we look at that poem from Kabir, it's literally from within that you feel the fire of that flame, that furnace of bliss that lives within you. It's always within us. But the modern romantic trajectory has made it more of something that's intangible, because you can't get it, because you're dependent on somebody else, a human, to give it to you. So it's a really interesting travesty in my mind of how the original devotional poets were looking at how romance is something that lives within you, to our modern version, whereas romance is something that requires you to find somebody to then ignite this passion within you, to complete you. If we look at the movie, I've forgotten the movie with Tom Cruise and Renee Zellweger, when she says to him, "You complete me," that dominated the 90s in the romantic comedy films, except that one wasn't very funny. So she's nothing except for this guy that completes her. So it's a very twisted version of what the original devotional poetry that ended up inspiring a lot of our modern day romance concepts were actually based on this real profound understanding that love and devotion come from within, from this fire that burns brightly within you, from your passion for life and the living of life itself was an amazing mystical experience. And through music and through chanting and through breathing, the Sufis and the Bhakti movement discovered how to give people experience of this beautiful life inside of you. And so I'll share how I stumbled across this movement, because I was 26 when I first found my first Sufi class. I didn't know it was Sufi. I thought it was yoga. And I went to the yoga class. That was actually a Sufi class. In my mind, it was yoga. And I'm doing these movements and I'm breathing in and I'm exhaling and I'm moving. And there's this Middle Eastern music. And I'm thinking, oh, this is nice. It's different yoga. And I went to the teacher after the class and I went, "What type of yoga is this? I've never done anything like it." And she said, "Oh, no, not yoga. This is Sufi. It's Sufi movement." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Oh, it's inspired by my Sufi master. It's from the Middle East and it's using inhale and exhale with movements similar to yoga. And it comes from my teacher who's based in New Mexico, Adnan Sarhan. You must come." And from that moment, she planted a seed. She said, "You must come." It was something in her tone, but a part of my whole being went, yes, I must come, because the class had ignited the flame inside of me, where I had felt through doing these simple movements with the inhale and the exhale that my mind had become quiet. And I had found this rhythm that was much larger than me. Of course, it's our in-breath and our out-breath, but I didn't understand what that was at that time. I'd done a little bit of meditation, and that in-breath and that out-breath moved me. I wasn't breathing. By the end of the class, I was being moved. And in Sufi movement, a lot of the arm movements are elevated. So I wasn't lifting or holding my arms. My arms were held by the space. later on in my later dance path, we used to say things like making love with the space, with Annetta Luce's work. And in that moment, that's what I was experiencing. My arms were elevated. They were up in the air for 30 minutes, and I wasn't lifting them. I was experiencing my arms being lifted. And that was the first taste I had in that first class of being lifted by a quality of movement where I wasn't in control. I'd done trance dance before that, but that's quite different, and it's very physical. This was more airy, more elevated. And since then, when I've shared the Sufi movement, I've shared it with non-dancers, people who are very immobile, people who are belly dancers, people who are more into improvised dance. So it goes across all sorts of walks of life. And they found that, again, they were able to feel this lifting and lightness in their body that enabled them to experience a purity, a beauty, a sense of peace, a sense of joy that was causeless and that flowed. And my experience then from that first class with Tamsin was a couple of months where after the classes I started to feel how the anxiety was going. I had an ongoing anxiety at the time. But in the class, this peace would come. And then after class, anxiety would come back to class, and I discovered the peace in the movement. And since then, I've been on a path through many other cultural dance forms, and I saw how many different cultures, they use dance to harmonize your body system. You might call them the chakras, but in cultural dance, you don't call them chakras. You call them that upper body or lower body. You call it the earth or the heavens. And we use the arms in a lot of cultural dance. In Middle Eastern dance, they use the arms to open up the heart space and connect to the space above the crown. We use the arms in Middle Eastern dance to open up the heart and connect to your audience that you're sharing with, to share from the heart. And in Afro-Brazilian, they use a lot of movements inspired from the Middle East as well that bring the energy from the heavens and connect it down to the earth, which is also very similar to some of the Sufi movements when we're looking at hands connecting to the heavens and hand connecting to the earth. And also in some of the lower body movements of the Middle Eastern and the Afro-Brazilian, you can see how a lot of the energy is anchoring into the ground so the upper body can elevate. And Sufi does a lot to balance and harmonize your upper body. And so the Afro-Brazilian and a lot of the Middle Eastern and African dances really work on grounding and releasing a lot of the energy from the lower chakras and the lower body into the ground and earth. So a lot of cultural dance is always harmonizing your upper body, your heart, your head with that lower body. And cultural dance was used as sort of a remedy for a lot of cultures that were learning how to have balance with, say, some of the parts of their culture that weren't quite harmonizing. And so through music and dance, they used to harmonize a lot of things that were out of balance. And if you look at Afro Samba and a lot of the dances from Brazil, they came from a lot of the slave era that was happening there. So a lot of the slaves created the dances to release a lot of their pent-up frustrations. Things like dance have been used throughout eternity to actually harmonize a lot of these things. So in the class that I'll be sharing, I'll be combining some of the gold that I've got from these cultural dances to help us really just celebrate and release a lot of this sludge that we've been having from our pandemic times. And what I'm seeing in our culture now is a lack of appreciation for life. We get stuck in the details of pandemics and COVID this, and now there's another variant, and then this problem. And we've forgotten that humanity for thousands of years have been dealing with disease. have been dealing with conflict and problems in our communities. And we need spaces to start celebrating again, to start connecting back to this magic of life. And I'm no Kabir, but I'm inspired by Kabir and how he was able to sit under a tree in India and have people from all different religious backgrounds, from all different ages, come to him, be around the tree, and be in a space where they could just experience their breath and experience the beauty of this life. We are at this tipping point in our world where we can start to really go into places of being insecure and not being together. So my goal is to create a space, and it's starting my class Dance for Joy with Sufi Movement is starting July 15 in Amira's Palace, Marrickville. So if you are interested in experiencing the magic of your life, of your breath and the movements and the joy that come from this workshop, then send me a message. You might not be in Sydney, so I'm trying to work out eventually how to get some of this online. But send me a message if you have any interest in that. I'm starting the movement class this July in Marrickville, Sydney, and hopefully we'll be able to start getting them more global as well. And let me know if you're going to be able to attend, and I'll put the link as well below the comments in the video. So because of my voice tonight, I'll be finishing the video now, and I look forward to any of your curiosity and interest around the Sufi work, the Bhakti movement. The Bhakti movement as well is a movement that has ended in my other school in India, which is the Golden Age movement, and they're working with people that are dedicated to enlightenment. So if you're interested in anything to do with the enlightenment traditions, I can connect you to some amazing peak state meditations that are completely free as well. And there are people that are being enlightened through the Golden Age movement at the moment as well. And their experiences are incredible. We have people that are in Ukraine at the moment that are having enlightened states. And because of that, they're able to support people who are struggling, who cannot find resources. They're able to magically find resources and share them with others. They're able to experience deep peace in the middle of the war. And also they're able to connect with their friends in Russia and create oneness with each other, because it doesn't really matter what country you're in. If you're in the middle of conflict, you're in conflict. So there's been amazing things that are happening through the Golden Age movement. And if you're interested in that, I can connect you to people who are doing free peak state. It's like a meditation, but it's a bit quicker than that. So that can help you as well if you're interested in the path of enlightenment. So make sure you can send me a message through the media. And if you can't do that through the directest way to contact me is Angela at Dance with Angela. So I look forward to hearing any of your comments, or send me a line, and stay well. My throat's already struggling, but I'm sure that it'll pass with a bit of the Sufi movement as well. All right. Thanks so much for joining.